Modi will be in the United States on a historic three-day visit starting Tuesday night. This is his first state visit to the United States and the third for an Indian leader. Before his departure, the Prime Minister issued a statement saying the invitation he has received from President Joe Biden and the First Lady is a reflection of the vigor and vitality of the partnership between our democracies, emphasizing that India-US ties are multifaceted. Amid deepening engagements, Prime Minister Modi said, the US is India's largest trade partner in goods and services. We collaborate closely in science and technology, education, health, defense and security fields, and the collaboration will consolidate the cooperation in bilateral and multilateral forums such as G20 and Quad. He went on to say, I'm confident that my visit to the United States will reinforce our ties based on shared values of democracy, diversity and freedom. Together, we stand stronger in meeting the shared global challenges. Meanwhile, in an interview to leading American newspaper, The Wall Street Journal, Prime Minister Modi said there's an unprecedented trust between the leaders of the US and India. Talking about India's place in the international order, the Prime Minister said India deserves a much higher, deeper and wider profile and role. Referring to border tensions with China, Prime Minister Modi stated, for normal bilateral ties with China, peace and tranquility in the border areas is essential. We have a core belief in respecting every country's sovereignty and territorial integrity, observing the rule of law and peaceful resolution of differences and disputes. At the same time, India is fully prepared and committed to protecting its sovereignty and dignity. In a reference to the Ukraine war, Prime Minister Modi said disputes should be resolved with diplomacy and dialogue, not war. Some people say we are neutral, but we are not neutral. We're on the side of peace. When asked about religious polarization and human rights in India, the Prime Minister said, for thousands of years, India has been the land where people of all faiths and beliefs have found the freedom to coexist peacefully and prosper. Well, all eyes will be on this all-important state visit this entire week. On the show today, we're asking, with this renewed push, can the India-US relationship emerge as the defining relationship of our times? And to try and find the answer to some of those questions, we're joined by a very special guest. I have with me on the show former Foreign Secretary of India, Ambassador Shashank. Sir, lovely to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you indeed for getting me on the television.
Lovely to have you,
sir. It's a very important occasion that we are discussing this issue.
Yes.
And it's a decisive phase in our relationship. Americans have taken the lead and India has responded. So let us hope that we are able to make some real progress.
Sir, it's being described as a historic visit. It is only the third state visit to the US by an Indian leader and only the third time that President Biden is hosting a state dinner for a world leader. In the present geopolitical scenario, do you believe Prime Minister Modi's visit can redefine the India-US relationship, or do we need to temper our expectations?
I think the initiative has been taken by the two leaders, and they have come to a stage where they can make a long-term relationship, a very strong relationship with our two democracies. If they miss this opportunity, I think it will be a lost cause for these two democracies. America at one time realized that if China could be helped to grow rapidly and become part of G2, then China perhaps might become a nation copy of the United States. Unfortunately, that has not happened. So let us see what are the expectations that the Americans have. I'm quite sure that Prime Minister Modi would have an opportunity to get the first-hand view whether America wants us to replace Pakistan in their Asian dynamic or to replace China, or do they feel that China is a very important player for them as a permanent member of the UN Security Council. But then gradually India can also be brought into the UN Security Council as a permanent member. And I think those are the issues which we have to keep in mind, that India's aspirations are also taken into account by the Americans. And I think the more disenchantment is growing in America for China, the more the Americans feel that the Russians are not succumbing rapidly to what the NATO has been trying to do to help democracy to increase in Europe, I think the India is getting a higher profile. And only thing is that if we can be acceptable to the general public in America, uh, it will be very good. And I think President Biden is leading from the front. He has not left it to the State Department, to the defense alone. He has taken everything on his own. So the National Security Advisor, Jack Sullivan, was here, and that was on the president's instructions to see what are the possibilities and how much we can go ahead together. So I think this is a very defining kind of phase which has come between our two countries. And I find that President Biden is doing something what President Bush had done a few
With the civil
couple of
nuclear
decades
deal.
earlier
Yes.
on the nuclear deal.
Yes.
So I think on the emerging and critical technologies, the initiatives which are now being taken by the United States to share them with India, so that might be a game changer. So only thing is that we have to go a little slow, because it is something which America has to give and we have to take. And we have to then integrate it within our own production processes, within our own technology processes. We have a very large number of Indians living in America, contributing in an enormous manner to the high technology sectors there. But can they come back to India also, or can the Indians also be developed in the same way, so that there is a much clearer, much closer interaction between the US technology firms and the Indian technology firms?
So I want to talk in further detail about technology transfer. Now, one area where most believe that the bilateral relationship is indeed crossing new frontiers is this area of technology transfer that you just referred to. Some important defense deals are certainly on the cards. And it is being said with regard to the GE F414 fighter jet engine and technology transfer deal that never before has the United States gone this far to accommodate a non-ally. Do you believe, sir, that the defense ties between India and the United States will be reset during this visit?
Well, in principle, a decision is likely to be on the cards. Now, how it will play out, how the different nuts and bolts of these agreements will be worked out by the various government departments and then by the private corporations, that we'll still have to see. So there might be some time gap. But the point is that these things were not being talked about earlier. Now they are being thought, they are being given aspirations by the senior most advisors to the President of the United States, which means that there is a decision. I mean, America is a democracy, India is a democracy. I agree to that. But I think the US system is very coherent. They know how to move ahead, where it helps America to maintain their prestige and respect in the whole world. And I think now they realize that India is the partner that they are looking out. We have seen earlier leaders also talk about it, but I think President Biden has given much greater by inviting our Prime Minister for a state visit, by the two houses of the Congress inviting the Prime Minister for the second time to make a public speech, I think, to the joint session. I think these are very important indicators to all kinds of organizations. There are a lot of NGOs, there are a lot of academics who are constantly trying to pick faults in the Indian system. But I think now a message should go down that this is what USA and India have set out to achieve. And therefore, it is better that other people also open their minds and try to see that this relationship means much more positively than what others say, that it is zero-sum game or something like this.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting you referred earlier to this technology transfer deal as a potential game changer. Let's now, sir, talk about the elephant in the room, China. You referred to China a short while ago. Now, in his pre-departure statement and interview to the Wall Street Journal, Prime Minister Modi has made a clear reference to the border tensions with China and hinted at growing cooperation between India and the United States in the Indo-Pacific. Now, even though the focus of this visit is on bilateral issues, perhaps one can safely assume that shared concerns over China's growing aggression and expansionism will come up in these talks. Would you agree with that, sir? And I know you said earlier that, the United States really needs to take a stand on how it perceives India's position in Asia. But do you believe that it's now come to a point where the United States perhaps does perceive India as some sort of a countervailing force against Beijing?
I think it's a very long drawn out process. We have seen recently that the Americans talked about decoupling with the Chinese and home shoring or friend shoring and of the high tech sector. Then they also talked about in February about some kind of Chinese spying on the American territory or North American territory.
The
Now they have
balloon,
suddenly
yes.
gone back on all that, and they are they have sent their Secretary of State to China. They have now come to an agreement that more and more secretaries will be traveling from USA to China. Therefore, there are limits to which they can disengage, and there are limits also to the extent that they can cooperate with each other. So I think India fits in somewhere in between. I don't think we can suddenly take over all the high-tech industries that China is working along with the American corporations, because it will take a very long time to prepare our people in learning and actually having those corporations in India with very high technology inputs. And that's why this critical and emerging technologies cooperation, which has been recently talked about, I think that could perhaps will make a difference when Indian, both at the governmental level and at the private sector level, would be able to reach a position where they can gradually replace China in the supply chains. I think this is a very important area, but both sides, India and US, have to work together. And China, we have to make sure that China was responsible for the spread of COVID. And at that time, nobody knew as to where the world would go. The United States companies try to take a lot of money out of the developing countries. They said, look, okay, they will supply Pfizer vaccine or other Moderna vaccines, but a lot of sovereign guarantees have to be given by the developing countries to pay them and to not take any case against the efficacy of those vaccines. India, on the other hand, immediately came out with their own vaccines, and they have been supplying them almost free of charge to most of the countries. So I think India has an image of itself. So I don't think the Americans, or especially not in the highest level of the government, but in many other sectors, in the private sector, in the academic sector, in the NGO levels, all kinds of other different departments, who are thinking very narrow terms, they sometimes feel that, well, India cannot be given as a same structure as China because it's not really in that capability. Because while China was asked to give extraterritorial concessions to the Western countries in the previous centuries, India was actually a colonial territory. And therefore, there is this feeling that how can India come up? So I think what President Biden has said, he is going to change the mindset of most of the people in America, and that is the most important thing which I see is likely to happen as a follow-up on this visit.
And also, given that China is an authoritarian country, and here, you're talking about the world's oldest democracy and the world's largest democracy coming together, that certainly does make a strong case, I guess, before the American people. You're right, sir. ISET, or the Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technologies, is very important now and is being seen as the organizing framework for this bilateral relationship. Collaboration between India and the US is expected to accelerate on multiple fronts, following this visit, especially those that fit into this ISET framework. But what, according to you, will be some of the biggest areas of convergence when the two leaders meet at the White House?
Well, the immediate thing would be that perhaps we can buy a large amount of commercial products that are available in America, and also sign deals for the defense items in the United States. I think these are the two immediate deliverables. But as you know that this Chat GPT founder was here in India recently, and he said, look, you will not be able to develop a Chat GPT type of AI tool.
Sam Altman, yes.
Or there are others also who have been talking about that Foxconn may not be able to retain all its manpower, technical manpower in India. And so they have to go back to China or they have to find some other base. So I think these are the kind of things which we have to keep in mind that sometimes there is a disquiet at the highest technology level in the American corporations, American technology world. And India also has to prepare itself that while opening up our markets to the outside companies, we should make sure that this Atmanirbharta campaign is for the high technology sectors also, and our people are well prepared for it. And therefore, whatever cooperation we can have with the United States, I think this is going to be a game changer for India, America bilateral relationship, but I think much more than that for the whole of Asia, that India will emerge as a very important and partner for supply chains to be made on the high technology sector.
You certainly are bullish as far as, cooperation in the area of technology between the two countries is concerned, and you do believe this is going to be a game changer. But, sir, between any two friendly countries, there are bound to be areas of divergence as well. What, according to you, are some of the thorny issues in this bilateral relationship that are likely to be addressed during this visit? Clearly, the US and India, for example, don't see eye to eye on the Ukraine war and the role of Russia or India's decision on energy imports from Russia.
Well, these are all issues which have been taken into account while inviting our Prime Minister for the state visit. So I don't think that these are something which are not known to the American administration or the American government system. They know that the Russians can be pushed up to such an extent. After all, the Americans had signed a lot of agreements with the Russians. At least verbally, they have been telling for the last 20 years, the Russians, that they will never go beyond certain limit. They will never make Russia feel uncomfortable. So, post Second World War, the Americans have been giving all kinds of assurances to Russia about the two countries coming together and stabilizing the whole world. Now, suddenly they are trying to find different systems, so the whole world has become unstable. Secondly, they always thought that China could be a very reliable partner if Russia somehow sinks in, and Chinese really got all kinds of technological support from the Americans. But now they have started competing in the highest technology sectors. Some of the Australian think tanks are saying that out of 40, 45 highest technology fields, perhaps Chinese have a upper hand in about 35 of them, and the Americans have only in about 10 of them. I do not know, perhaps this is too alarmist kind of a report, but the point remains that America has to keep in mind that the other countries which are there, and they cannot be just wished away. So Russia cannot be wished away, China cannot be wished away. So America has to find a peaceful solution through diplomatic negotiations, through diplomacy. India is prepared to do that. India has always talked about peace and diplomacy being used for sorting out differences. And we have been told again and again, even in the Asian scene, that whenever we have had differences with China or with Pakistan or any other country, that India should work for peace, India should try to find a diplomatic solution. I think what the European countries, the Western countries have been telling us for the last 60, 70 years, I think it's time for them to realize that there are realities which are different from the past. India has lost a lot of manpower in the first two wars, First World War, Second World War. India is not prepared to lose any more of its people, because we feel that rather than being as the cannon fodders, it would be much better for them to provide the technology inputs to the best companies in the world. It will be very important for them to set up new vaccines for finding new viruses which are likely to emerge in future. And I think these are the kind of areas where India's brain power is supposed to be much more important than simply using India as one of the tools to be having a unipolar kind of situation for the next 100 years for the United States. And I think for that, President Biden, I'm sure that he has very good inputs at the highest level. He has taken certain decisions, but definitely there are other people who are constantly cribbing or sending inputs from their side, that why not try to put some more pressure on India, perhaps it will fall in line with our thinking. So I think these are the kind of issues, because India is a divided country, like the United States is a divided country. We have opposition parties, we have all kinds of opinions being expressed, on both sides. So that does not mean that we don't have to move forward in a decisive manner towards a joint objective that we want to achieve in Asia and the world. And I think that is the important thing which I think President Biden and Prime Minister Modi have to lead. They have to understand each other's thinking. And I think this is a that's why I feel that this is an extremely important phase in our bilateral relations and which will have a great impact on the global scene also.
Well, certainly, we may be a divided country in many respects, but perhaps it would be safe to say that when it comes to foreign policy, there is a fairly high degree of bipartisanship on most issues. And of course, as far as Russia is concerned, India has made it abundantly clear over the last year or so that it intends to pursue an independent foreign policy. Let me ask you this, sir. The US administration and the media often raise prickly issues like press freedom, religious freedoms, and human rights in India. The Wall Street Journal asked Prime Minister Modi about it in their interview. Are these issues likely to come up in these talks at all, you think?
No, one thing is about issues coming up during discussions and friends talking freely about each other's concerns, about their own concerns, about their own aspirations. But the other thing is that those issues are being used by partisan thinkers for their own agendas. That is the wrong thing. And I think they should not be allowed to have a decisive say on the policy making at the highest levels. And I think we have reached a stage where over the last 20, 30 years, India and USA have started moving towards a defining partnership for this century. And this has been repeatedly stated by many people. But somehow or the other, because as I said, that the democracies of the two countries are very vocal, very subdivided. So therefore, people want to embarrass each other. They want to embarrass the leadership of the other parties. And I think this perhaps is not a very good role. But anyway, I think this is part of the reality. And we have to understand that, take that on board. At the same time, we have to improve our own lifestyle. India has been able to explain to all the people that thousands of years, people have been coming to India. Whenever they have been finding discrimination, anywhere else. Whenever they have been hounded out from other countries, they have come to India. And they have been able to maintain their own lifestyles. And it is a respect for the Indian civilizational values that it has been accepted by at least most of the civilizational countries that India is the best partner. If you look at the Israelis, I think in their own constitution, perhaps they have put down certain paragraphs praising India and saying the only country which has always accepted the Jews as good friends. I think these are the kind of things which have to be taken into account. And I think one has to understand the civilizational heritage of India. Yoga is only one aspect. The other aspect is that India treats the whole world as a family. So India is working on that. I mean, we have sent our best experts, our best professors, scientists, IT experts to the United States and to all the other countries. It is because we consider that all of us have to, unless we can come together, this globe will not be able to live well and find the nature and the climate and all these issues. They have to be treated in a comprehensive whole rather than in a divided into separate compartments.
Right. So let me ask you this. The issue of visa delays is of great significance to Indians. The wait time is too long. And then there is the issue of reissuance of H-1B visas, often forcing Indians to return home first. Many have said if India is indeed such an important friend to the US, as it claims, the US administration should then walk the talk and not make Indians wait for a visa for 2 to 3 years. Can the US administration be expected to make some major concessions on this front during Prime Minister Modi's visit?
But there are two problems. As I mentioned, that one problem is that they feel that India can be pressurized into behaving like a junior partner. And so therefore, there are people who say that let us continue with the present approach. It will have a result sometime or the other. The second issue is that most people in America feel that China has taken over all the polluting industries from America, from the Western world, whereas India is taking on those industries which the Western world would like to keep for themselves. And therefore, there is a feeling that India somehow will create a new kind of a rival, if at all, if ever they become like China as a major technological prowess in the world. And I think in some sectors, like space sector and some other sectors, we have people have done very well. So, but I think what we have to keep in mind that we have to look at the totality of the Indian approach to the issues, and I think this will be a defining thing. You are saying that this is only some people feel, but I think this is a very important issue, that the visa issue, it really hurts the ordinary Indian people. And any success of the visit will be judged by the Indian people on the basis whether Chinese and Pakistanis can get a visa within a day, whereas Indians have to wait for 3 years or 4 years. I mean, what does it mean? It really shows that perhaps the government is moving in one direction, not knowing what the people want. I think, therefore, it's very important. I remember Sushma Swaraj as foreign minister did her very best. Wherever there was a difficulty in the world, she immediately came forward and said, no, Indians have to be taken care of. And in addition, if there are other people from other countries in the world who are also in a dire situation, we'll help them also. So I think that is the attitude which we have, and I think the Americans have to understand that during this visit.
You're quite right, sir. It's ironical that on the one hand, China is an adversary, yet it is so much easier for Chinese nationals to get American visas, and they constantly call India a friendly nation, yet, the wait time is just inordinately long. This needs to be addressed. Let's now shift our focus to, the bigger foreign policy picture, as it were. Under Prime Minister Modi, India has come into its own on the global stage, repeatedly asserting its independent foreign policy like a self-assured nation, even in the face of criticism. And Prime Minister Modi's words of advice to Russian President Vladimir Putin that this is not an era of war, in the context of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, resonated globally. What does this state visit mean for India's global stature, given that before this, President Biden has held state dinners only for the French and South Korean presidents?
Well, President Biden in this term has had only 3 state guests.
Yeah.
So India is one of them. So there's no doubt about it. There's an extremely important relationship in which President Biden has invested his political goodwill in the country. And I think as the elections are due next year in the United States, I have no doubt at all that he would like to be treated by the very large Indian origin community in the United States and by the world as a whole that he's a global leader. Number one, he has understood the Indian position. Number two, that if India was very friendly with the Republican President Trump, he can be very friendly. Prime Minister Modi can be very, very friendly with President Biden. So I think it can be a chapter of the past when Democrats felt that they could talk only of the human rights in India, and the Republicans would talk about the possibility of commercial and economic cooperation and the strategic cooperation with India. I think these things are merging together. Chinese have realized that. Chinese think tanks are already talking about that the Democrats and Republicans in America have come to a stage where China would always be treated as an antagonist. And more pressure would be applied on it, whether it's decoupling, whether it's a question of de-risking. But India also, I think this way, it has to gradually build up the relationship, because we know the importance of the bilateral relationship. We have moved a very long distance from where we were, let's say, 40, 50 years ago or earlier. I think we need to be steady on our path, because this is important for both our countries. So I feel that this is the only way that we can move ahead. And Prime Minister Modi has given a big deal on the foreign policy, because he is likely to be treated as the G20 leader. He has also made an appeal to the world leaders to accept African Union as a member of the G20.
Yes.
So I think European Union is a member there. So if Prime Minister Modi says that India is the voice of the global South, I think that is the greatest achievement in case everyone can agree to having the African Union as a member of the G20. So that the demand of India to become a permanent member of the UN Security Council should get closer, but at the same time, other organizations, other consultative mechanisms should develop whereby they also become more participatory rather than dictatorial for the world. As far as Russia and India are concerned, I have no doubt that whether it's Russia, whether it is the relationship with because India depends 80% for its energy resources on the world. We cannot allow this to be held ransom for this any war in Europe or any other kind of difficulty that we have, even
Right.
our own wars with Pakistan and China. So I think our relationship on the North-South corridor through Iran with Russia, which are also linked with a lot of Central Asian countries, East European countries, and similarly on the other side, our Northeast linking with the Burmese and the Southeast Asian countries. These are very important. They affect both, and because our idea should be that China should behave like an old civilizational power, Russia should behave like a friend of India, but at the same time as a peaceful, friendly country for the world. And I think
Right.
that is what we would like to work on.
Well, there is no doubt this is going to be a defining year for India's foreign policy. This is a historic state visit indeed, and let's hope that the final outcomes are indeed tangible and on the lines that we are hoping for. On that note, Ambassador Shashank, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much, sir, for your time and perspective on this critical story.
Thank you very much. Yeah. All the best to you.
Thank you, sir.